looking at this an event in the Civil War, April 1865, right? You can just easily go and read April 1865. Many of the History Channel documentaries are based on books a la April 1865. And if you're really looking for the depth that's required for something like that, then watching even a 2-hour documentary on the History Channel is probably not going to get you there. But reading a book absolutely will. Could not agree more with Shirao Wolf on that one. The Male White Mage pointed toward TVO, and I thought this was really cool. So I did not know TVO. Obviously, I think it's linked to kind of a more Canadian, Ontario-based educational resource. However, I thought there was some really cool stuff up there when I went to go and check out the link. I do check out the links you guys put up there. It reminded me of similar things to like TED Talks, Google Tech Talks, things like this that are posted on the internet that really do have some tremendously interesting educational value. A lot of times, guys, it's not necessarily about telling the history of things. A lot of people get bored by lecturing. It's about kind of the engaging of critical ideas. And sites like TVO, I think, are doing a great job with that. I saw there were just some tremendous links of people that I even knew some of their work, like I think Pinker was on there. And there were just some very interesting links up there, and I think that could be the future of content. I know I've listened to several hour-long Google Tech Talks in my time, just trying to kind of get what people are thinking about out there in academia about technology. And a lot of my ideas come from inspiration from those. Prangerade. Chris Pranger talked about the MTV syndrome of these channels and how that has really become pervasive. And I couldn't agree more. I think that's a fantastic way to, I mean, I prefer to think of it as the Tom Beers oration of these channels. You know, it started many years ago with TLC and Discovery with Monster House and Flip This House and all those kinds of things. But let's face it, MTV probably is the quintessential model for this with Real World, right? Think about it. All of a sudden MTV realized that fewer people were watching their music videos, which had been their bread and butter since 1980. And in the early 90s realized, wow, we need to really change formats here because it seems like everyone's watching all the programming that we're putting out that's not music video related. And there you have it, right? So I think many of the channels have done exactly the same thing. Even though the History Channel is putting out some tremendous documentaries, I think what they realized was that their cash cow could reside somewhere else other than those documentaries. Like something like American Pickers and something like Pawn Stars, which are two very good shows. I would argue those two shows are very, very good. I'm not sure they're History Channel shows, but they're very good. They realized they could use that as a cash cow to go produce the kind of TV that I'm looking for from the History Channel, educational and more in-depth. That hasn't really panned out so far because now the History Channel seems to only be doing that kind of content instead of using it as kind of a cash cow to fund these other projects. So I'm a little disappointed in them, which is hence why I'm asking this question to you guys. But I think that's a great way to put it, the old MTV syndrome. So I think Chris is right onto it there. Estolia basically, you know, first of all, in a way that only Estolia can, move toward cooking shows as being the only educational show to watch on TV. And I'm just going to throw it out there. I think Rue would agree with you 100%, because just ever get into a conversation with Rue about Alton Brown, and you will realize very quickly that his love for cooking shows knows no bounds. However, and my disdain for cooking shows, knows no bounds. Although I have to say, when I'm hungry, there is nothing in the world like turning on something and just seeing what people do to make food, because it will make you hungry in a heartbeat, and it'll also give you ideas for what to go get what to go get to eat. But in addition to cooking shows, which do have their educational value, maybe you turn to them, besides the History Channel. Estolia mentioned Beekman's World, which is exactly the kind of TV that I'm talking about and looking for. Beekman's World, which, by the way, it goes without saying. If any of you know Bill Nye the Science Guy, I feel sorry for you if you don't know Beekman's World, because Beekman's World was 100 times better than Bill Nye the Science Guy. Just throwing it out there, guys. Feel free to disagree, but I think it should just be. I think it should just go into Wikipedia as a certifiable fact. Beekman's World is the greatest kids scientific show I've ever seen. Anyway, the point is, Beekman's World was great because it introduced that kind. It was kind of a, it was a light, almost like a MythBusters, but for kids. 10 years, 15 years before MythBusters has been around for a long time. 10 years. So I would say, you know, before that, the whole MythBusters phenomenon, before that kind of popular science TV kind of thing, Beekman's World was on PBS and it was doing that kind of work. And it was hysterically funny, and it rivaled most Saturday morning cartoons or Saturday morning shows in terms of how funny it was. But I know I wrote in several times to try to get my idea, my question on Beekman's World, because they tackle a lot of really cool scientific ideas. And I know many of the things that I know today, or that I remember from that age, I learned from Beekman's World. So I wanted to say thanks for the shout out for Beekman's World. Ferrier mentioned that there are now the kind of spin-off networks that are handling the niches at this point, of which History International, or as it's now known in the United States at least, H2, which and I think is a more appropriate name because History 2 is now handling all of the kind of documentary History Channel programming. So maybe 5-6 years ago, it was the World War II channel, or at least the History Channel was. H2 kind of now feeds the niche of all the people that are looking to watch documentaries, that are looking to watch the more modern marvels, that are looking to, and I know Mr. K has problems with modern marvels, just at least because he had to watch that one 100 times. Couldn't agree more, Mr. K. Modern marvels is kind of an interesting phenomenon. But I do like the idea of history of technology, and Modern Marvel does that pretty well, at least for the things that they look into. When they did, like, I think they did a couple of 80s gadget shows, I thought that was just fantastic, and I think that's the kind of stuff I would love to get into. You know, I love video game documentaries. I love history of the kind of PCs and things like that, and you can find a lot of these things online. I think they're very enjoyable. But H2 is where Ferrier goes to feed that niche, and I couldn't agree more. H2 happens to be the same answer for me. I actually find myself watching H2 more than I find myself watching the History Channel now. Not really sure why they decided to go that route, but that's the way that it works. So I guess I'm just the niche and not the popular. And Final Fan 777 talked about Nat Geo, and I think National Geographic absolutely kind of sits in the middle somewhere between a Discovery and a PBS. Their content is definitely more Discovery than it is PBS, but I think it's a very good point, and I think it's one worth mentioning. Nat Geo does some great work. All right, now I'm going to tell you what I think. There are several different channels that I go to for this kind of stuff, and I think Nat Geo is one of them. But you know, let's just talk in a more broad sense. Let's back up here a minute. I think it's very disconcerting, let's say, with what's gone on with the History Channel and what's gone on with many of the channels that I go to for educational content. For me, it does signify, as many of you highlighted, it does signify kind of a dumbing down, or at least a lack of depth in some of the things that people want to engage in. You know, we want those kind of quick hits. We want to take our 30 minutes. I was watching a show yesterday I thought is actually really, really good, and a shout out to Mr. K in Alabama. Rocket City Rednecks is a fantastic show, not because it has a tremendous amount of educational value, but because there really are a kind of, you know, it shows how this kind of scientific understanding of the world and these people with these tremendous degrees can do some really amazing things, right? Instead of going through years and years and years of R&D, it's just kind of, hey, here's an idea, let's go make it happen in a 30-minute slot. And most of the time when I watch that show, I find myself wanting an hour, not 30 minutes. But anyway, if you're looking to get anything beyond the kind of quick hits, your life is becoming more difficult. Let's just face it. With all the information that's out there, one of the things that I think is very prominent in terms of the thinkers of our time is that it's not, you know, more information is available than it's ever been available at any moment in history before. However, there's more kind of lack of depth or superfluous information than probably any of us have ever experienced in history, in the history of humanity before at this moment. So I think that's a terrible thing, and I would hope that, remember how many of you were alive back when we were talking about what the internet was going to do for everyone. The web was going to solve all of our problems. And one of the reasons why is because people assumed that if you had all the information in the world available, that it would start to do things like cure disease, and that it would start to do things like feed the poor, right? And all these kinds of things. And it hasn't done that at all. And part of the reason it hasn't done that is because information, even perfect information, doesn't mean that people make perfect decisions or have perfect, content or consumption models, right? So even if all the greatest information and the most accurate information is out there, it doesn't mean people are going to be interested in it, people are going to watch it, and people are going to consume it at any kind of rate. And so I think what we're seeing here is a kind of mixture of the consumption of information and the availability of information. And when those two streams come together, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. And unfortunately, it looks like the MTV syndrome happens to be the answer. So, where do I go? I go to Netflix. You guys, many of you said that. I love Netflix documentaries. My queue on Netflix is just full of documentaries that most people would look at and just go, why the hell is this on here? And I like engaging. I even like engaging with documentaries that are 10 years old just to see how things have changed, right? See how people are making different kinds of documentaries. But in terms of the History Channel, I want to talk about some of the things that they put out that were really, really good that I think show their educational value above all else. The History Channel a few years ago did a documentary, I think it was 2007, The Dark Ages. Was a tremendous documentary series that I think went into a tremendous amount of depth. They also did one around the same time called Barbarians. Fantastic. It was just so educational and so many things wrapped up into one. Now, when you wanted to get into the granular about, well, what really differentiates the Visigoths from, say, something like more like the Vikings, right? And how do these cultures kind of develop? And if you wanted to go into more depth, you're not going to get it from the Barbarians documentary, but I thought it did a great job of, over the course of many, many different hour-long episodes, they really cover a lot of these different barbarian cultures to show that there is a tremendous amount of influence that they've had as these kind of subjugated peoples, right, throughout history, as much as, say, the folks that were doing the subjecting, the Romans, so on and so forth. I thought that was fantastic. But I want to highlight one thing that I thought was just the best documentary I think the History Channel has ever done. Right before the movie 300 came out, the History Channel did a special, and I think it was an hour and a half or even 2 hours long, which was specifically about the Battle of Thermopylae. And it was just the absolute picture, in my opinion, of what History Channel documentaries should look like and should do. If they made, and I realize that had maybe a larger budget than they're used to and so on and so forth, but they did a great job of kind of merging the style from the film and then taking the historical accuracy that they're kind of celebrating and then combining those two together. That I think that's the model, and that's the way I'd like to see shows go into the future. Anyway, so, until then, I'll definitely be going to my PBSs, my Netflix, to try to find those kinds of niche documentaries, because I do like educational programming, and I like to kind of cram these things in my mind, even if I'm never going to use them for any kind of purpose. Many of you mentioned that, the idea of using it for, a job or any of these kinds of things. I just like to learn, and I think many of you are probably the same way, hence why you're even listening and watching this video right now here on Clan of the Grey Wolf. Now, let's get to the question for next week. Now, last week, as many of you know, and by the way, we're coming up on a year here, which is fantastic. This is episode 50, a great milestone. Haven't missed a week yet, don't intend to. Looking forward to kicking off the kind of holiday season here, which is where we started with the Weekly Wringer. So I'm very excited. But last week, we had the launching of Minecraft. Now, we talked about Minecraft several times here on the Weekly Wringer and elsewhere, but I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about, and ask you guys a little bit about the phenomenon. Now, I'm not here to talk about Minecraft specifically, but Minecraft launched with Minecon out in Las Vegas, and it was this huge showing, and it was like the celebrity kind of event, and so on and so forth. Now, for those of you that don't know what Minecraft is, it's kind of a simple idea born of one guy that then was, instead of kind of being sheltered and harbored and just kind of given little teasers about until it's